Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner, and welcome to the next installment of my Psy-Changeling reading recap videos where I'm going to be talking about Silver Silence, which is book 1 in the Psy-Trinity series, which is the spin-off series, but book 16 overall in timeline order. I love this book so very much. So this one's probably going to be a long one because the books that I love, I talk about a lot. Get yourself comfy, get a cup of tea, get a drink, come back and join me, and we're going to talk all things spoilery about Silver Silence. If you haven't heard, we are continuing the Psy-Changeling read-along, and we are going to be reading the Psy-Trinity books. We are reading 2 books for the month of June. We are reading Silver Silence and Ocean Light. I don't have all the details yet about the live show, but as soon as I do, I will leave them probably on my community page so you can check out when all of that is happening. Silver Silence, as I said, is the first book in the Psy-Trinity series, which we tend to jump around to different places more in the Psy-Trinity series. So this book takes place in Moscow, and we also have slight glimpses into the Human Alliance work in Venice as well. And that is in comparison to the previous series where we spent a lot of time jumping around from either the Snow Dancer or the Dark River packs. In this story, we are following Silver Mercant, who is a 9.3 telepath with a mutation of her telepathy audio, and she is Caleb Krychek's former senior aide. So she did a lot of work for Caleb, and she is also the heir to the Mercant family. The Mercants are a group of Psy who are basically information brokers, spies, and kind of like kingmakers. So they tend to know everything that's going on, and they back the people that they have faith and trust in. They're also a little bit like the Night Star group in that they are very family oriented and they take care of their own. Silver sort of stepped down from some of her duties as Caleb's aide when she took over the MNet, or the Emergency Response Network, and that is primarily what she's working with in this book. And her hero is Valentin Nikolaev, who is the alpha of the Stone Water Bear clan, and he is a brown bear shifter, and he's delightful. This book is kind of a Grumpy Sunshine in reverse. Silver's not super grumpy, but she is very reluctant to reveal her emotions initially, whereas Valentin is all over it. The story starts in 2082, so that gives you a frame of reference for where we are in the timeline. The story is told in 2 parts. Part 1 takes up the majority of the book. Part 2 is sort of the last quarter of the story. The story begins with Silver opening the door at about 7 a.m. in her apartment to Alpha Nikolaev, who has turned up on her doorstep uninvited and has somehow got through security and has some papers to hand her for the MNet. We find out that he has constantly been finding reasons and excuses to be around her, and he often sends her food and turns up unexpectedly, and she finds it mildly irritating but also oddly endearing at the same time. We know that Valentin is very interested in pursuing Silver as a potential mate, to the point where he has already got a nickname for her. He calls her Starlight and encourages her to call him Teddy Bear. So I'm going to leave that right there because this is a running joke through the whole book. It honestly makes it so much fun. While he is in her apartment, Silver collapses and he realizes that she has been poisoned. Valentin contacts Caleb, who is able to teleport her to a medical facility, and while Caleb is getting her to safety, Valentin begins going through all of her food, and the Psy mostly drinks sort of like nutrient drinks and bits and pieces, and he finds that some of the containers have been contaminated, and each time he finds a contaminated container, he gives it to Caleb, who then sends it off to be tested so that they can better treat Silver in hospital. Caleb then takes Valentin to the hospital where he meets Ina Mercant, who is the head of the Mercant group and is Silver's grandmother. Ina is a very scary individual and I love her to pieces. She is one of my favorite of the elder Psy that we meet in the series. She loves her family. She will do anything for them, but she's freaking terrifying. She's a bit like Nikita in that sense, but she's the grandmother figure for the Mercant family as well. Ina realizes that someone in the family group had to have potentially been involved in Silver's poisoning because Silver doesn't let very many people into her apartment. Ina also realizes that she potentially can't keep Silver safe because all of the Mercant safe houses are accessible by all of the family members. And so she asks him to give Silver sanctuary in his den home with his clan, and in exchange she promises that any information that Silver learns or the Mercant family learns as a result of her stay with the Bear Changelings will not be revealed to anyone else. Valentin is very, very pleased with this because he would like nothing better than to have Silver in his home. Throughout the book we get these little interludes where we see different perspectives from people who are part of the consortium or part of the group behind who was trying to kill Silver. So we get one of these at this point where we find out that a member of the consortium has tried to kill Silver, and it may or may not be on the orders of the actual consortium group. The consortium is a group of individuals who are deeply opposed to peace between the three races, and so they are seeking to destabilize everything. So we get lots of these little stop-throughs all the way through the book, and I'll talk about them as they come up. Another little story that's peppered through the main story is the story of the Human Alliance, and this is setting up Ocean Light, which is Bowen's book. While Silver is in hospital, Caleb goes to see Bowen, who has received information that has been leaked that the Psy need humans in their network. Caleb has gone to talk to Bowen about the likelihood of them being able to encourage interactions between Psy and humans. And of course, Bowen is very wary of the Psy, but he has started to build these relationships with various members in the Psy community. And so he wants confirmation from Caleb that this is something that needs to happen, but also that the Psy aren't going to force the humans to do it. And one of the things that he suggests is that if the Psy help the humans find a way to shield themselves mentally from Psy coercion, then they might be more likely to interact with each other. Once Silver is released from hospital, Valentin drives her back home to Stonewater clan territory, and along the way she meets the tiny bear gangsters, who are some of the youngest cubs who like to play out in den territory and hang upside down from trees and drop on unsuspecting passers-by, and they are delightful. We love the tiny bear gangsters. They appear throughout the whole book, and I would just like to cuddle all of them. We also find out that Valentin became alpha after Zoya, who was the previous alpha, stepped down, and we find out later on exactly why Zoya was the alpha of the Stonewater clan, because it has run in Valentin's family for many years. As Silver enters Denholm, or the Stonewater clan home, she realizes that something about the group is wounded or broken, that there is a sadness there that she doesn't quite know the extent of the history of the clan, and we get more hints and the reveal of that throughout the story. We meet a lot of the Stonewater clan, so it functions very similar to many of the other Changeling packs, but just with slightly different names. So Valentin is the alpha, and then he has a circle of seconds. In that group of seconds, who are like the lieutenants or the sentinels in the previous Changeling groups, he has a first second, which is his oldest sister Stasia, and then a core group of soldiers that help protect the den. We meet Pavel, Yakov, Pieter, who is Stasia's mate. We find out about Zahan, Taji, and Inara, and we also find out more about Valentin's family. So he has the older sister Stasia, he also has Nova, who is another older sister, and she is a healer, and also Nika, who is his sister, but she is currently not in Denholm and she's traveling, and we get a little bit of information about her later on. After arriving in Denholm, Silver is really tired, so Valentin takes her to her room and lets her sleep. Then he goes to check in with his clan, and so he's talking with Pavel about the security and about the potential security risk that Silver presents by being a Psy in a changeling den, but everything seems to be under control, and Valentin then spends some time with the cubs. And this is the one thing that I love about this book, is we spend a lot of time with the younger clanmates in this book, and it just warms my heart because you guys know how much I love all of the mini changelings that we meet in the series, and we spend a lot of time with them. Silver wakes up the next day and she is contacted by her brother Arwen, who was born 10 minutes apart from her but to different mothers. So their father is who they have in common, and he had breeding contracts with two different women, and as it turned out, Arwen and Silver were born 10 minutes apart, and they're really, really close. Arwen has heard about the attack on her and is really concerned, and also heard that she's been shepherded away into a changeling den, and he's very concerned that it's all going to be too much for her. After she's finished speaking with her family, Nova comes in and brings some shoes for Silver because clothes have been arranged, but she had very sensible shoes. And one of the things that we know about Silver is that she always is immaculate. She's always wearing suits and ridiculous heels, and that's the persona that she puts on, as this very powerful, efficient, strong, ice-cold woman in her public persona. And Nova knows that being in the den, she probably wants to have some fun shoes rather than just ridiculous flat shoes, because why would you want that? Nova and Silver bond, and it's glorious. I really love the connection that Nova and Silver have in this particular book, because Nova goes out of her way to make Silver feel welcome and safe, even when some of the other clanmates are really wary about her being there. Nova also shares some stories about their childhood, like the fact that she once made Valentin run around wearing a pair of pink heels, and also reveals that Valentin only ever courts women that he sees as his equals. And the fact that he is fixated on Silver means that he sees her absolutely as an equal. It's not a power imbalance. He only wants someone who is going to be as strong as he is. And then she gets a little bit of a tour of Denholm with Nova, who then returns her to her room when she begins to get tired. And I love that we spend a lot of time with Nova because we see the healers throughout the Changeling series all the time, and I love it when we spend more time with them because they are probably one of the friendliest subgroups within the Changeling packs. Later on, Valentin hears something happening in Silver's room and he freaks out, so he breaks down the door and rushes in, to which he's like, I dropped something on the floor. So he's a bit sheepish. He ends up giving her a massive electronics pack so that she can continue to do her Mnet work while staying in Denholm. While she's working, he starts fixing her door. And his whole plan is to take a leaf out of Lucas's book and be sneaky like a cat and try and court this very cool Psy that happens to be staying with him. We also have our first introduction to Dima, who is nicknamed the Barnacle. He is a little bear cub who likes to run up to various adults and hold on to their leg and not let them go. Dima is Nova's son, and we meet his father in a little while, and he's a polar bear cub, and he is delightful. Arwen then arrives in Stonewater territory asking to speak to Silver. We switch back to Venice with the Human Alliance, and the Human Alliance receives a sort of crackpot email from a group called HAPMA, or the Humans Against Psy Manipulation, who are warning the Human Alliance away from making connections through the Trinity Accord to the Changeling and the Psy races. Bowen addresses this and basically ignores the email, but then also gets a phone call from his cousin Phoenix, who has just mated a Stonewater bear, and that is Nika, who is Valentin's sister. Bowen ends up calling Valentin and congratulating them and basically going, we're family now, which is a really nice little connection throughout the book. Back at Denholm, the bears celebrate Nika's mating. Even though she's not there, they just throw a party because the bears like to throw a party. And Silver sees for the first time the sort of funny things that the bears do, and they do it with so much affection and love for each other. Our next major event happens, and that's when a bomb goes off in Moscow, and it basically occurs at a club. It's a suicide bombing and is at a wedding reception. Valentin and Silver head into the city because Mnet is the emergency response group, and Silver needs to be there to head it up. Silver coordinates all the rescue efforts that are occurring. Valentin assists with the rescue and recovery, and also Silver ends up calling in Arrows and other groups to help manage the situation. And she only stops when it becomes a recovery rather than a rescue mission, and Valentin takes her home so that she can sleep. She sleeps for nearly a day afterwards, and then when she wakes up, she ends up going searching for food in Denholm, and there she meets Chaos, who is Nova's mate and Dima's father. Chaos is a polar bear shifter, and he manages the food in the kitchen. He has been looking for things that she might be able to eat, so he has acquired some of the Psy food that she might eat, but also has been replicating simple meals that Silver would be comfortable eating that consist of real food and not just nutrient drinks and nutrient bars. The tabloids also report Valentin and Silver's relationship because there's a photo taken of them at the bombing site, and they read into it that there is a relationship there. And as it turns out, it generates a lot of really good publicity for the Psy, and their relationship is polling really well, even though there's technically not a relationship at this point. But everyone finds it highly amusing. Valentin begins to challenge Silver's silence. What we find out is that Silver believes that she desperately needs the silence, that there is something to do with her telepathy, that if she were to break silence, it would go haywire and it would cause lots and lots of issues for her. We don't know quite what it is yet, but she truly believes that silence is the only option for her at this point. There are a series of bombings that take place in Berlin, Shanghai, and Melbourne, and Silver coordinates all of the relief efforts from Denholm and realizes that she needs a much bigger team to support her. While she's trying to manage all of this mostly on her own, Pavel comes in and is able to assist her, and she jokingly offers him a job, to which he jokingly replies that if she throws in Arwen, he'll happily accept the job. And so suddenly we have this lovely little hint at a potential relationship between Pavel and Arwen, which would be a really great book. I would really like that one. After all of this, Hatma claims responsibility for these bombings, which initially doesn't necessarily make sense because the bombings are actually injuring far more humans than they are any of the other races. And so we're beginning to wonder whether Hatma is actually aligned with the consortium or not. We find out that that wound that Stonewater has to do with the fact that once Valentin became alpha, a quarter of the Stonewater Bear clan actually left in protest. And this has to do with Valentin's family and the way that they think that he might become like his father, and we'll find out that story in a little bit. But this separation between the clan is causing a lot of problems, particularly amongst the juveniles and also the adults, because some people's families have been split down the line, half of the family left. It's just this open wound that no one has been able to heal yet. When some of the juveniles begin to get into fights, Peter tells Valentin that he needs to sort it. He needs to figure out how to fix the problem. And Valentin's really reluctant to do that because he wants to give the group that left more time to come back. After coordinating all of the relief efforts, Silver is exhausted, and Valentin jokingly offers to give her a massage, to which she actually accepts, which shocks the hell out of him. And what she tells him is that she is willing to test the limits of her silence and allow skin-to-skin contact to see how far she can push herself. It's a really great scene. After this, and after Silver has been so vulnerable with him, Valentin opens up about his father, who in his late 40s, suddenly his personality shifted and he started murdering members of his own clan. And as a result of that, his own seconds had to kill him and put him down because he was just out of control, which is why the group that left don't trust Valentin, because they are not sure whether they can trust him or whether he's going to have the same psychotic break that his father did. The ruling coalition of the Psy meet at this point and they discuss the leaked information that Hatma seems to have received around the fact that the Psy need humans within the Psy-net in order to support it. And Ivy suggests that they do what Bowen asked, and the Psy find a way to help protect humans from Psy manipulation and intrusion in order to earn goodwill. And after some initial back and forth and debate around the efficacy of this, all of the ruling coalition agree to it. Even Nikita, who was the one who opposed it in the first place. Arwen realizes that Silver's silence is beginning to come apart, and he contacts her and comes to visit her again to check in on her. And Arwen is deeply in tune with Silver, not only because he is her brother, but also because he is an E-Psy. And that is one of the Mercant's secret, is that not everyone in their family group has been silent, because Ina never forced Arwen to go through the silence protocol because she knew that that would cause harm to him. And so even though many of the Mercants are deeply silent, they also have members who are not, and they care for each other as a family. Hatma contacts Bowen in Venice and tells him that he needs to stand down as the security person for the Human Alliance, obviously to which Bowen refuses. And then back in Denholm, Silver goes for a walk with Nova and Moira, another clanmate who's pregnant. And while they're out for a walk, Moira goes into labour. And Silver and Nova help Moira through her labour, and this changes Silver, and she's kind of feeling all of these emotions that she's never felt before because she's just seen new life come into the world. And so it deeply affects her because they've had a new cub born into the clan. The clan starts to prepare for a party, and Silver helps out with that. And Valentin also kisses Silver for the first time at this point. Knowing that she needs more help, Silver begins to advertise for positions in the Mnet team, and taking Valentin's advice, she tries to recruit across all three races, humans, changelings, and Psy, so that she has a balanced group of people, because Mnet is supposed to represent and work for everyone and not just the Psy. She also has to start interviewing for a new senior aide for Caleb. Lennox is a character who had stepped in to fill her shoes, and while he's very efficient and good at his job, he doesn't believe that he's capable of being the person that Caleb constantly talks to, because Caleb is intense. So Silver begins to look for someone who could work above Lennox, but still keep Lennox employed because he's very good at his job. After visiting with the newborn cub, Valentin decides to go and visit the group of bears who split off from Stonewater. And when he gets there, because they're still on Stonewater territory, they're just living separately, and he's trying to give them time to figure out what it is that they want to do. And when he gets there, he plays with all of the cubs. They're so excited to see him, and he spends a lot of time talking with the juveniles there as well. And he doesn't say anything else to the adults who are watching the whole time. He just spends time with the younger members of his clan, and they just need him to be there because that's the power of the alpha within the changeling groups. However, when he returns after that visit, he's really upset, and he goes to Silver for comfort, and she offers it to him, which is a significant step in their relationship. After that, they have the party for the newborn cub, and bears party really well. So the new cub's name is Daniel, and he's shown off to everyone in the clan. The cubs get to go and see him, and they're all really gentle and very sweet. And then the family go away so that they can have some peace and quiet and some sleep, and then the bears party. So there's lots of drinking, lots of antics. Silver sits down with all of the cubs and is answering their questions about silence because they're really curious about it, and they interpret some of her answers in a really insightful way. Throughout the party, Silver behaves like an alpha's partner, which is noticed by many of the clan members and Valentin, who is ecstatic at this. At the very end, we get this hint that Silver's powers are starting to malfunction because she's starting to hear all of these things that she shouldn't be able to hear. And as a telepath, she naturally picks up the thoughts of other people, but the things that she's hearing are things that are not thoughts. They're the sounds of the trees miles and miles away. And that's when we start to begin to unpack exactly what the mutation of her telepathy is. After the party, Silver and Valentin have sex for the first time, and afterwards she begins to reveal exactly what the true nature of her powers is. So not only is she a telepath, but she's a telepath with a sub-designation called audio, which is not a sub-designation that often survives outside of silence, because she basically functions like a radio tower. Her telepathy allows her to hear the thoughts of people around her, and she has to mentally block those out. But the audio component means that she can hear everything, and it's not coming in through her regular hearing, it's coming in psychically. So she basically hears the world as a second layer over the top of hearing all of the telepathy, but also her natural hearing. And there's no way to actually shut off the audio component of it. She's basically an antenna. In order to not go crazy, she was encased in these ironclad mental shields in order to protect herself. And now those shields have started to crumble, and they started crumbling when the Honeycomb Initiative was set up in the Psy-Net, because emotion was starting to leak in, and it's emotion that basically makes it very hard to separate the audio component of her telepathy from everything else. Valentin throws out the suggestion that perhaps Ashira Aline could offer some insight, because she worked on the Protocol 1 implants, which was designed to create a hive mind, but Valentin suggests that maybe if Ashira had more information, she could offer something that would allow some control or the ability to shut off Silver's audio telepathy. And so Silver promises to get into contact with Ashira. Silver and Valentin go for a walk out in Stonewater territory, and she wants to know more about the mating bond because she's realizing that she has feelings for Valentin. While they're out there on their walk, she also asks to see Valentin's changeling form, and so he shifts into the big brown bear, and she ends up riding on his back as he goes for a run through the woods. Once Silver contacts Ashira, she agrees to help look into the problem with Silver's telepathy, and she gets Amara and Samuel Rain involved as well, and what they need are lots of current scans of Silver's brain, and so Silver goes through the process of sitting and having all of those brain scans taken. Meanwhile, Valentin realizes that something has happened with the clanmates who have separated from the main group, and he ends up going there and finding the young healer for the group desperately worn out because the juveniles in that pack have been fighting, and he has been trying to heal all of the wounds that have resulted from that attack. And while Valentin primarily goes there to support the healer and lend the healer his strength, as he walks away, he draws a line in the sand with the group, and he basically tells them, you either come back and you rejoin your family, or you have to leave. You have to leave, and you have to set up an alpha, and you have to make sure that that alpha is strong enough to protect you from not only the Black-Edged Wolves, which is the other changeling pack that borders the Stonewater territory, but also from Stonewater themselves, because they're setting themselves up as a separate pack. And he leaves it at that, and he goes back to Denholm, and when he gets back there, the rest of Stonewater have found out that he's told them to either come back or get out. And they're very upset by that, but they also, most of them understand that that is a decision that has to be made. But Valentin still needs to console them and to comfort them, and Silver stays with him throughout that whole process and offers the Stonewater Bears her support and her comfort as well. And it's one of the first signs of them really working together as an alpha pair within the clan. Eventually, the split clan members do return to Denholm, and one of the members from that group, Sergei, was the first second to Valentin's father and has been very wary of Valentin being alpha. Silver is the one who goes up to him and basically tells him that he has to make the decision. He either has to abide by Denholm rules and Valentin's alpha status, or he has to leave. And so she is taking on that role of alpha within the pack as well. And it was just a great scene because she is amazing as a character. You really see that she is this very strong, capable woman in her own right, and she always has been. Silver's powers continue to be a problem, and increasingly so, and Ashira, Amara and Samuel Rain have come up with an experimental surgery that might be able to help her. However, by undergoing the surgery, which would basically split her emotional center off from her audio telepathy in the hopes that that will basically render her audio telepathy unable to function, she could end up more silent than silent and emotionless. I totally forgot to say that earlier, back when Valentin and Silver were going for a walk in Den Territory after talking about the mating bond, Valentin was talking to Silver about the mating bond and about what happened to his parents. Galena and Mikhail were mated pairs until his father had the psychotic break and basically cut the mating bond, which basically broke his mother, who has chosen to remain in bear form and live in the wild rather than stay in the den. And they were discussing that Valentin's father had shown no previous signs of being murderous at all or psychotic, and that it only happened after he'd been out on patrol for 2 weeks and came back injured, but unable to talk about exactly what had happened. And Silver tells him that around that time, back many years ago, the Psy were running experiments on changelings, and that the timelines would fit with Mikhail potentially having been involved because there was a Stonewater bear who was involved in those experiments, but he was unnamed. And Silver tells Valentin that the experiments were discontinued because the results were very unpredictable in changelings. They were trying to program them to be sleeper agents, but sometimes the changelings would actually just go off without any prompting, and so the Psy discontinued the experiments. And after this conversation, Silver drops her psychic shields and accepts Valentin's mating bond, so they're a mated pair at this stage, which is important because when Silver goes into the surgery, she and Valentin have had these conversations around the fact that no matter what, Valentin will still love her and will still care for her and will keep an eye on her, even if she is emotionless afterwards and can't give him what he needs. He just wants her to live. But what he does ask her to promise him is that she will give him 10 dates when she wakes up, so that even if she does lose her emotions, she owes him those 10 dates, and that's his chance to win her back. The surgery is a success. Her emotions are cut off. However, what they've done in the surgery, something that Silver had agreed to, is they've seeded her brain with these filaments that could potentially help her build new emotional pathways should she choose to do that. Silver then wakes up emotionless and can't understand why she would want to do that. She remembers the relationship and her time spent in the den home, but she doesn't remember the emotion attached to it. And so she's very cool and aloof and very much like the Silver Mercat we met very early on in the Psy-Changeling series. She chooses then to go back to her job and her role and to leave the den home, which Valentin lets her go. And while this is really painful for him, he realizes that the mating bond is still there. It's faint and it's not as strong as it was before, but it hasn't gone. And that's the end of part 1. Part 2 is obviously Silver's now silent again, and it's how we get back to our lovely relationship because they are one of my favorite couples in the entire series. Part 2 opens with Bowen and Lily, his sister, being attacked. And the attack is initially targeted at Lily. And this is that rebel member of the consortium who attacked Silver at the start, trying to frame the Psy for an attack on humans. And so a sniper is trained on Lily. Bowen spots the laser sight and ends up taking the bullet for his sister. Very important because this is the foundation for everything that happens in Ocean Light. Despite the fact that she has lost her emotions, we find out that Silver is still dreaming at nighttime. We also find out that she's had her 29th birthday, and that for her 29th birthday, Valentin snuck into her apartment, which is in a changeling apartment complex, and he left her a birthday card, which was a little girl riding a bear, as a reminder to their experience in the Stonewater territory. And Silver remembers that experience, but she doesn't remember the emotion attached to it yet. That said, Valentin remains a constant presence in her life. He's constantly picking her up and taking her to work. He just turns up wherever she is, which she doesn't find annoying, which is the first signs that perhaps not everything is as it seems. There is one instance where he picks her up and takes her to breakfast to have waffles, and it's a great scene because everyone's watching them, and it goes back to that initial scene where the tabloids reported them as a couple. Again, people see them and they think that they are fantastic together, and it continues that good publicity for the Psy. And it also gives Valentin more opportunities to continually appear in her life. He plays on the public popularity of their relationship as well, and he's also constantly buying and sending her food, particularly when she forgets to restock her food supplies. Meanwhile, Silver herself is still continuing to check in with the Stonewater clan because it's part of her responsibility, because she understands that the clan came to rely on her, so she still maintains that. Throughout this point of the book, Hatma is continuing to attack targets, Mnet is continuing to respond, and Silver now has her team of people that she hired who are managing a lot of that with her. She's also in contact with Malachi Reese from Black Sea, as well as Lily, around everything that has happened, particularly with the assassination attempt against Bowen. Lily lets Silver know that she believes that a group called the Patel Conglomerate, who work in energy, have something to do with the assassination attempt, particularly because the leader of the Patel group, Ashkay, is very opposed to integration of the 3 different races. Valentin goes to visit Silver in her apartment and takes Dima, who shifts into a polar bear while Silver is holding him, and it's very adorable, particularly when they have to leave and Dima has shifted back into his little boy form and then realizes that he doesn't have clothes, and Valentin tells him that he might be arrested for public nudity. And so Dima shifts back into a polar bear. That should go in my fun things section, but I have to put it here because it's just adorable. The Mercants have been continuing to investigate how Silver was poisoned in the first place. Ivan Mercant, who works security at Silver's old apartment building, finds out that Silver's neighbour, Monique Ling, has returned. She's there for months and then not there for months, and lets Valentin know. And so Valentin goes over to talk to her and find out if she'd seen anything suspicious, and Monique lets him know that there was one time when she had a guest over whose name was Jai, and the power went out in the building, and then she also passed out because she'd been drinking too much. And we find out that the power shouldn't have gone out in the building in the first place because there are redundancies for that, and that Jai is actually related to Ashkay Patel. He's his cousin. So Valentin collects Silver and also Eric, who works for Mnet and is human, and they go to have a chat to Jai. And Eric is there because the Human Alliance would prefer them to have a human member there so that Silver and Valentin don't go completely off the deep end while talking to a potential suspect. And when they're talking to Jai, Valentin and Silver scare him into giving up his cousin, and Eric just watches, entirely amused by the entire situation. He thinks that their bad cop and worst cop routine is fantastic. Silver passes on the information about Ashkay Patel to Ina, and Ina is the one who gets him alone and begins the interrogation of him with Caleb's help. We find out that Ashkay's wife was psychically raped by the Psy, which is why he is very anti-Psy. And while Ina has him in this locked room, he tries to shoot her and he can't. He thinks that Ina is telepathically controlling him, but as it turns out, her powers allow her to control weapons, but she doesn't disabuse him of the notion that she's controlling him because it incites fear, and basically she lays down an ultimatum in exchange for information. Ashkay reveals to Ina that the head of the consortium is actually a woman, and he also gives up the name of the head of the Hatma group. There are some really great scenes between Silver, Valentin, Ina and Caleb as they're discussing all the information that they've involved, as well as smaller discussions between both Ina and Caleb and Valentin. I loved all of them, particularly seeing how Caleb interacts with Valentin, and that we've had a couple of those interactions throughout the book and they're delightful. In spite of her emotionless state throughout this section, Silver and Valentin have been talking about the potential of having offspring, like a breeding contract like the Psy do, because Silver does believe that they would have very powerful children. Valentin sees this as another way to potentially keep Silver in his life, and so he agrees to it and is surprised that she would agree to it. And then when Silver reveals this to Ina, Ina says that she wants to go to Denholm because she wants to visit the place where her future grandchildren will be spending a lot of their time. And so Silver and Valentin take Ina to Denholm, which is the first time Silver's been back since her surgery. And while Valentin is showing Ina around Denholm, Silver actually goes out to find Galena, Valentin's mother. And she finds her and she's still in her bear form, and in a parallel to what Valentin did when he went to visit the clanmates who had split off from Stonewater, she tells Galena to stop hurting her children, and that she either has to come home or she has to leave because her presence is hurting them, because they can see her but she's not talking to them, she's not interacting with them, and it's not allowing their wounds to heal. When she returns to Denholm, she asks Valentin for skin privileges again, and she reveals that her emotional pathways have been rebuilt. She also realizes that when she accepted the mating bond with Valentin, she was still connected both to the Psynet, which she needs to be for her role in Mnet, but she's also connected to the Stonewater Bear clan, and it doesn't connect both groups to each other, but it allows her to be part of both groups. And that's sort of the closure of their major romantic arc. The last 3 things that happen in this book is that Galena returns to Denholm so that they can begin to rebuild their family. Ashkay Patel is found dead, not killed by Ina, although Ina had made that a possibility, but it looks like he committed suicide, but they suspect that the consortium is behind it. And also Lily asks for Mnet's help in suppressing the true extent of Bowen's injuries, because at this stage Bowen is still alive, but his prognosis is not good. He was shot in the head, and Lily wants to keep the attention of the media and the world away from that fact for the time being. And so Silver and Mnet work to maintain some of that distance between that shooting. So that's the major plot line, and it's a lot. In terms of world facts, I kept this one pretty short because I tried to put most of it into the main plot because I actually think it was really relevant. Some of the interesting things that we learned about telepaths was that prior to the introduction of the Silence Protocol, telepaths had the highest suicide rate because they had a lot of trouble blocking off the thoughts of everyone around them. Whereas post-Silence, they had the lowest suicide rate. And that is part of Silver's reasoning for why she shouldn't break silence, because she actually needs it to maintain her sanity. We also have the introduction to the Wild Woman magazine, which pops up here and there in future books. It's sort of the little, whenever we get to a new chapter and you have either quotes or bits and pieces, it's one of the little sections that's added at the start of every chapter. And Wild Woman magazine is a magazine that offers advice for romantic relationships involving changelings, and it offers advice to all the other races around how you behave in a relationship with a changeling and what the changeling's behavior indicates about their relationship. And it is delightful and fun, and I love it so much. In terms of my fun stuff, this book is so full of fun things, and to be honest, I've shared a lot of them in the main plot, but things that I separated out that were fun little points in the world that didn't necessarily impact on the greater story is that the bears have a reputation for partying, and in Moscow there is a bear surcharge for most pubs and bars because usually when the bears go out, something gets broken. Interestingly enough, we find out that it's very rarely the bears who start any fights or anything inside a pub, and they also have a very high tolerance for alcohol, so it's not usually an alcohol fueled thing, but things get broken when the bears are there, and so there's a bear surcharge. And quite often Valentin will get a call basically saying, you got to pay for these you've got to pay for this damaged property now. When Caleb first tried to start dealing with the Stonewater Bear clan, the bears refused to deal with him until he sat down and had a beer with them. At that point, this was pre-Sahara, so Caleb was not likely to sit down and have a beer with them. But what he did do was that he bought the biggest barrel of beer and then threatened to throw it away. So the bears finally sat down and had a chat to him. I love all the times where we see the bear cubs. There's heaps and heaps of scenes seated throughout the entire book. There is a scene where Deemer is dressed up in a full formal outfit. I think it's for the newborn cub party, and he asks Silver to dance, and it's just gorgeous and glorious. Deemer is just a little precious bean. There is a truly hilarious scene where Valentin finds some of the tiny bear gangsters who have gotten themselves into a spot of mischief. One of them is stuck in a hole in a rock, and he's completely covered in butter because his friends tried to get him out of the hole by lathering him up in butter that they'd stolen from the kitchen, so then they also end up with kitchen duty afterwards. Valentin obviously ends up rescuing them, and they're all very upset that their friend got stuck in a hole and they couldn't save him. But it is just the most glorious little scene in the whole book because the adults don't get angry. They have there's a punishment for them for the behavior, but there's also respect for the resourcefulness and the fact that they stuck with their friend and they tried to make it right. And I loved the scene so much. And then there's also that little hint at the Pavel and Arwen relationship, which it's like throwaway lines in the book. But after their first meeting, Pavel investigates Arwen, gets his phone number, and basically starts sending him ridiculous text messages. And Arwen is like, why? Why are you doing this? But even in the end, Silver is even encouraging Arwen to think about the relationship, and I loved it so much. So if you can't tell already, I adore this book. It is just absolutely delightful and fun and all the feelings. We have all the feelings. So that is the end of my wrap up and recap. I would love for you guys to talk to me about this book in the comments or join our Discord group for the read along and come and have a chat to all of us about the book because it is just such a fun story. It's a great starting point if you want to start the series but you don't want to go through the first 15 books, which can be a bit of a slog. I think it's a really good starting point for people. If you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave me a teddy bear emoji on the screen for Mr. I Am a Teddy Bear, Valentin Nikolaev. I would love to see the teddy bears because they're so cute. Otherwise, I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and well, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.